I paid my parents' bills for years, but my dad kicked me out on Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be a time for family, warmth, and tradition. That was the idea, at least. But reality? It was something else entirely. I've been back home for nearly 2 years now, ever since my dad's accident. Before that, I had my own place, a decent setup for a guy in his early 20s. Small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had a steady job as a manager at Best Buy. I paid my bills. I did what I needed to do. Then Mom called. Her voice was tight, worried. Said they were struggling to make ends meet. Dad had been in an accident, lost his trucking job, and things were getting bad. Real bad. I didn't think twice. I packed up, broke my lease, and moved back home. At first, it wasn't so bad. I figured it would be temporary. Just until Dad got back on his feet, found a new job. But weeks turned into months, months into years. And Dad never got back on his feet. His leg didn't heal right, and even after physical therapy, he stopped trying. Spent most of his days in his recliner, remote in hand, flipping through channels like he was searching for some version of his life that didn't exist anymore. Mom picked up extra shifts at Walmart, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. So I stepped up, paid the mortgage, covered the utilities, made sure there was food in the fridge, even helped Mason with his college applications because Mom didn't have the time, and Dad barely acknowledged Mason existed anymore. I never complained. Not once. But I guess, deep down, I thought they appreciated what I was doing. Thought they saw how much I was sacrificing to keep us afloat. Thought they respected me for it. Turns out, I was dead wrong. Thanksgiving dinner started like every other year. Mom made the usual spread: turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, that weird cranberry sauce that still looked exactly like the can it came from. Mason was inhaling food like he'd just escaped from a deserted island. Dad had already worked his way through half a six-pack. Me? I was just trying to enjoy the meal, pretending that for one night, we were a normal family. Then, out of habit, I pulled out my phone and checked my bank app. Just a quick glance. And that's when I saw it. Mortgage payment. Overdue. I frowned. That couldn't be right. I'd given Mom the money 2 weeks ago. Hey, quick question, I said, setting my fork down. Why is the mortgage payment late? Silence. Not the normal kind. Not the kind where people are just too busy eating to answer. No, this was something different. The air in the room shifted. Heavier. Mom went stiff, reaching for the gravy boat like she hadn't heard me. Mason suddenly found his mashed potatoes extremely interesting. And Dad's grip tightened around his fork, knuckles turning white. I gave you guys the money. Did the bank mess something up? I kept my voice even casual, but inside my stomach twisted. Mom finally cleared her throat. It's fine, Ryan. Don't worry about it. Yeah, see, that's not an answer. Where did the money go? Dad slammed his fork down. You think you're in charge here, huh? His voice was low, but sharp. The kind of sharp that makes your gut instinct scream at you to shut up, drop it, move on. But I didn't. I blinked. What? No, You think just because you pay some bills you get to question me? This is my house, Ryan, not yours. I let out a dry laugh, more out of disbelief than anything. Is it? Because if I'm the one keeping the lights on, the water running, and food on the table, then what does that make it? Another beat of silence. A different kind this time. Heavier. Mom squeezed her eyes shut like she was willing this whole conversation to disappear. Mason's fork clattered against his plate. And Dad pushed back his chair and stood up so fast it nearly toppled over. If you don't like it, he said, voice shaking with barely contained rage, then get out. The words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at Mom, at Mason. Neither of them said a word. They just stared at their plates like this was another one of Dad's outbursts that would pass in an hour. But something told me this time was different. And I was right. Dad's words hung in the air longer than they should have. But I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, I just nodded, pushed my chair back, and stood up. No yelling, no arguing, no pleading my case. Just one word. Okay. The room stayed dead silent. except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a football game playing on the TV in the living room. Dad's face shifted, like he was expecting more of a fight. When none came, he smirked, clearly thinking he'd won. He probably imagined I'd stomp off, maybe slam a door, then come back in an hour and apologize like I was the one out of line. But that wasn't happening. Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at her plate, pushing mashed potatoes around with her fork like if she avoided looking at me long enough, none of this would be real. Mason looked like he wanted to say something, but he stayed quiet, jaw clenched, eyes flicking between me and Dad. I took my plate, scraped the leftovers into the trash, rinsed it in the sink, and set it in the dishwasher. A completely normal motion for a completely abnormal situation. Then I turned, grabbed my coat off the back of my chair, and walked out of the kitchen. Dad let out a little huff, shaking his head like I was some kind of joke. He thought he'd broken me. Let him think that. Upstairs in my room. Well, the room that used to be mine before I started paying for everything. I started packing. Not frantically, not emotionally. Just methodically. The essentials, my work laptop, a couple changes of clothes, my toiletries. My car keys were already in my pocket. I didn't know much anymore since most of my money had gone into keeping this house afloat, but I had enough to walk out without looking back. I wasn't worried about me. I had a steady paycheck, a solid credit score, and enough saved up for a motel or an Airbnb until I figured out something more permanent. No, the ones who should have been worried were still sitting downstairs, finishing a dinner they could no longer afford. Without me, this house wasn't going to last a month. Mom knew it too. She wasn't clueless. She'd spent the last year watching me Venmo her hundreds of dollars for bills, watching me load groceries into the fridge while Dad sat on his recliner doing nothing. She knew exactly how much I was holding this place together, but she wouldn't say a word. She never did. She just let it happen. I zipped up my bag, took one last glance around, and then sat on the edge of the bed waiting, not for an apology, not for a change of heart, just waiting. Sure enough, a little past midnight, there was a knock at my door. Quiet, hesitant. Then the door creaked open, and Mason slipped inside. He shut behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. "They won't make it," he finally said, voice low. "You know that, right?" I nodded. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Dad doesn't even know how to pay the utility bills. He's never done it. Mom always handled it before she started working extra shifts, and when she couldn't, you took over. Without you," he exhaled sharply, "they're screwed." I leaned back against the headboard, watching him. He wasn't wrong. Dad didn't even know the Wi-Fi password, let alone how to pay a mortgage. The man once called me and asked how to order something off Amazon. And the more I thought about it, the funnier it got. Not in a ha-ha way, but in a this is so ridiculous, I don't even have words kind of way. Mason shifted awkwardly. Also, I think Dad's in gambling. That got my attention. "Online poker," Mason said. "I've seen him on those sites late at night, when he thinks no one's watching. He's been losing money. A lot of it. Pretty sure Mom knows, but doesn't say anything because she doesn't want to set him off." I let that sink in. So that's where my money had gone. Not to bills, not to groceries. To online poker. To Dad's little habit that no one wanted to acknowledge. I smirked, shaking my head. "So, let me get this straight. I've been paying a mortgage, covering groceries, keeping the lights on, and meanwhile, Dad's been blowing cash online, thinking he's some kind of high roller." Mason nodded. "Yeah, and now that you're leaving, it's going to get real bad, real fast." I exhaled slowly, stretching my arms above my head before grabbing my bag. "Well, guess they're about to get a real expensive lesson." Mason didn't argue. He just nodded, looking more exhausted than any 17-year-old should. "Yeah, they are." I slung my bag over my shoulder, walked to the door, and before stepping out, I clapped him on the shoulder. Let's see how long they last without me. And with that, I left. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Not once. Not even when I heard the TV still playing in the living room. The muffled sound of Dad cracking open another beer like nothing had happened. Not even when I stepped into the cold night air and realized this was the first time in 2 years I was leaving without any guilt weighing me down. But before I drove off, I had one last thing to do. Sitting in my car, I pulled out my phone and opened up my bank apps. I'd set everything to autopay: electricity, water, gas, internet, even their Netflix subscription. It had just been easier that way. Less chance of them forgetting to pay something and having me swoop in to fix it. Well, that was over now. I went through each account, canceling every automatic payment. One by one, the house slipped further into financial freefall. Electricity? Gone. Water? Done. Internet? Yeah. Good luck with that, Dad. Even their precious Netflix was cut off. Mason was the only one I felt a little bad for, but he was smart. He'd figure something out. The rest of them? They were about to get a wake-up call they'd never forget. By the time I was done, the house was just a building with four walls, running on borrowed time. I glanced up at the second-floor window, my old room. The light was still on. Mason was probably still awake, maybe watching the glow of his screen dim as the Wi-Fi cut off. I almost laughed. Then I put my car in drive and left for good. The motel smelled like stale coffee and bad decisions, but it was cheap and had a bed, so I wasn't complaining. The shower pressure was weak, the vending machine ate my dollar, and the guy at the front desk looked like he hadn't slept since 2005. But hey, I'd slept in worse places. 3 days later, I found an apartment. Nothing fancy, one bedroom. Barely enough space to turn around in the kitchen, and the fridge made a weird humming noise that I chose to ignore. But it was mine. No one telling me what to do. No one expecting me to foot the bill for their life choices. Just peace and quiet. And then, a week later, the call started. The first time, I ignored it. I knew exactly who it was. Let them sit in the dark for a little longer. Maybe they'd finally appreciate what I'd been doing all this time. The second time I picked up, it was Mom. Her voice was shaky, but I could tell she was trying to hold it together. "Something's wrong," she said. "The power's out. The internet isn't working. I think the water's off too." I leaned back against my couch, completely unbothered. "That's weird," I said. "I thought the bills paid themselves." Silence. Then a deep inhale, like she was trying not to lose it. "Ryan, please. We need to talk." I already knew where this was going, but I let her talk anyway. "Your father," he didn't mean what he said. "He's just stressed. We all are. This is your home. 2, you can come back, we can fix this, but you need to apologize to him." I almost laughed. "Almost? That's interesting," I said, keeping my voice calm, "because when he was kicking me out, I don't remember you mentioning anything about us being a family." She hesitated. "You know how he is." "Yeah, I do. And that's exactly why I'm not coming back." She started to say something else, but I didn't hear it, because by then, I'd already ended the call. Let them figure it out. This was their problem now. The notification popped up on my phone while I was in the middle of reheating a sad-looking frozen burrito. "Suspicious activity detected on your account." My stomach tightened. I clicked on the alert, and there it was: multiple failed login attempts, someone trying to reset my password. I stared at the screen for a second, then exhaled. Only one person would be dumb enough to try this. Dad. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mason. The phone rang once, twice. Then he picked up, whispering. He's at the computer. He's mad. Like, really mad. He's going through some old notebook of yours. I think he's looking for passwords. I ran a hand through my hair and let out a short laugh. Of course. I had left an old notebook in my room when I moved out. Nothing important. Just random notes, grocery lists, maybe some old passwords from when I was a teenager. But apparently, Dad thought he had struck gold. Mason kept whispering. He's tried like 10 times already. Keeps muttering under his breath. Mom's just sitting there, not saying anything. I shook my head. Unbelievable. There was a pause. Then Mason said, "You know he's not going to stop, right? He's convinced you owe him." I took a deep breath. "Yeah, I know." I opened up my banking app and started securing everything. 2-factor authentication? On. Security questions? Changed. Every old password I ever used? Gone. I even went as far as deleting some old accounts just to be safe. Then, for good measure, I called the bank and had them flag my account. No one was getting in but me. As I scrolled through my account history, something else caught my eye. A few months back, there were small, repeated charges, amounts too insignificant for me to have noticed at the time. They weren't for my usual bills or subscriptions. They were transfers. Small at first, then growing larger. The recipient? Unfamiliar. Then it clicked. Online gambling. Dad had already been dipping into my account before I left. He must have figured out a way to authorize small transfers, hoping I wouldn't notice. And I hadn't. Not until now. Mason sighed on the other end. I don't know how Mom puts up with this. I did. She was too used to keeping the peace. Too used to making excuses. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Listen, I said, if you ever need anything, I got you. You don't have to deal with this alone. Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he mumbled, thanks. I smiled, then hung up. Dad could keep trying, but he'd never get in. And this was just the beginning. The pounding on my door came just after 10 at night. Heavy, angry. The kind of knocking that makes your stomach drop before your brain even catches up. I already knew who it was before I heard his voice. Open up. You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can leave me like some piece of trash? I didn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed calm. I was sitting on my couch, phone already in my hand. I didn't even have to think about it. I just dialed. Across the room, my girlfriend's eyes were wide. She pulled her knees up onto the couch and whispered, Dude, your dad is losing it. The knocking turned into full-on banging. He was putting his full weight into it now, rattling the doorframe. You're my son. You don't do this to family. You don't turn your back on your own father. I didn't answer. Didn't even acknowledge him. The 911 operator picked up, and I gave them my address. My father is outside my apartment. He's yelling, pounding on my door, and he won't leave. I think he might try to break in. They told me officers were on their way. Less than 5 minutes. I hung up, and my girlfriend gave me a look that was half disbelief, half concern. He seriously tracked you down? I nodded. Guess he didn't like losing access to my bank account. The banging got louder. Ryan, open this door right now. You don't get to ignore me. Then the handle rattled. I stood up, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door, but not to open it, just to be ready. Seconds later, blue and red lights flashed through the window. Sir, step away from the door. The voice was firm, commanding. My dad hesitated, then turned to face them, throwing his hands in the air like he was a victim here. This is my son. He stole from me. He abandoned his family. I just want to talk to him. I cracked the door open just enough to see what was happening. 2 officers stood in the hallway, hands hovering near their belts. One of them shook his head. Sir, you need to lower your voice and step back. Dad wasn't listening. He kept ranting, his arms flailing. This is my kid. You think you can take my own son away from me? He owes me. He owes his family. The neighbors were starting to peek out of their doors. A few of them stepped fully into the hall, watching the scene unfold. I caught Mrs. Carter from next door shaking her head. She leaned toward another tenant and muttered, He looks completely unhinged. That was putting it mildly. Dad took another step toward the officers, still yelling. You don't understand. He betrayed me. He left us to rot. That was it. One officer moved forward, grabbing his arm. Sir, turn around. Hands behind your back. Dad jerked away. You can't do this. This is my son. He's my blood. The second officer reached for his radio. We're detaining him now. And just like that, they pulled his arms behind him, snapped the cuffs into place, and started walking him toward the exit. He kept yelling, but his voice was fading. I stood in the doorway, watching. My girlfriend exhaled. Dude, that was insane. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. Yeah, it was. I stepped back inside and shut the door behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely safe. The rest of the night was a blur. I sat on the couch, staring at the door like I half expected him to come charging back in. My girlfriend kept glancing at me, like she wasn't sure if she should say something or just let me process everything. Eventually, she grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge and sat next to me. Well, she said, cracking one open, that was probably the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I used to bartend in Florida. That actually got a laugh out of me. A short one, but still. I'd apologize for the drama, but honestly, this was a long time coming. She took a sip, then tilted her head. What do you think happens next? I shrugged. I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm done cleaning up his messes. We sat there for a while, just letting the weight of everything settle. Outside, the flashing lights disappeared, and the hallway fell quiet again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed my dad anything anymore. The text came in while I was grabbing coffee on my way to work. Mason's name flashed on my screen, followed by a message that made me stop in my tracks. Mom pawned your camera. The DSLR. The expensive one. For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. Maybe my brain hadn't fully processed the words. But no, it was there, plain as day. I clenched my jaw, shoved my coffee onto the roof of my car, and called her. She picked up after the third ring, her voice tense. Ryan. I didn't even let her get past my name. You sold my stuff? My camera? Are you serious? There was a pause, then she scoffed. We needed the money. My grip tightened around my phone. You needed the money, so you stole from me? That camera was worth over $2,000. Her voice turned sharp. You think you're too good for this family now? You left us to suffer. We had no choice. You owe us. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. I owe you? After everything I did for you? After paying your bills, covering the mortgage, putting food on the table? And your way of thanking me is stealing my stuff and pawning it off. She snapped back, her voice rising. You abandoned us, Ryan. You turned your back on your own family. You are not my son anymore. I swallowed hard, tried to push down the anger bubbling in my chest. You know what? That's fine, because after this, I don't think I want to be your son anymore. I hung up before she could say another word. I sat in my car for a while, just staring at the windshield, trying to process what had just happened. A part of me wasn't even surprised. I should have seen it coming. The minute I cut them off financially, they were bound to get desperate. I just didn't think they'd go this far. I opened my banking app and double-checked everything, making sure nothing else had been tampered with. Then I sent Mason a text. What else did they take? He replied almost instantly. They've been going through all your stuff. I think they plan to sell more. Your old gaming console, some clothes, even that fancy watch you got as a graduation gift. I sighed, running a hand over my face. Do me a favor. If there's anything left that matters, grab it and keep it safe. I'll come get it. Got it. I put my phone down and exhaled slowly. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train was my family, and the wreck had been happening for years. After a few minutes, I forced myself to drive to work. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to fix anything. But even as I went through my usual routine, clocking in, answering emails, dealing with customers, I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. At lunch, I called the pawn shop. The guy on the other end sounded bored, like he had no interest in my problems. Yeah, we got a DSLR in this morning. Black, Canon, good condition. I gritted my teeth. That's mine. It was stolen from me. The guy sighed. Look, buddy, unless you got proof, there's not much I can do. If you want it back, you'll have to buy it. How much? He named a price that made me want to throw my phone across the room. They had lowballed her when she sold it, but now they were jacking up the price to sell it back to me. Classic. I consider my options. I could call the cops, but without a police report from the time of the theft, they probably wouldn't do much. My mom would just play the I'm his mother. It was in my house card, and they'd shrug it off as a family dispute. I leaned against the break room counter, rubbing my temples. This was a mess. And somehow, I knew it wasn't over yet. I woke up early, grabbed my coffee, and headed out the door like any other morning. But the second I stepped into the parking lot, my stomach dropped. My car was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had parked somewhere else. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the lot. Nothing, just empty spaces, and a couple of cars that weren't mine. A sinking feeling hit me, and I already knew who was responsible. I pulled out my phone and called Mason. He picked up almost immediately. "Dude," I said, "tell me my car isn't sitting in front of the house right now." Silence. Then a sigh. "Yeah, about that." I was already in my Uber before he even finished the sentence. When I pulled up to the house, there was my car, parked right in the driveway like it had never left. I barely had time to process it before Mason stepped outside, looking both guilty and exhausted. "Mom found the spare key," he said. "She gave it to Dad. He took the car last night." I clenched my jaw. Where was he taking it? Mason hesitated. He told some guy he'd sell it for parts. But I think he chickened out. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my anger in check. Before I could say anything, the front door swung open, and there they were, my parents. Mom crossed her arms. Dad stood next to her, smug as ever. "You want your car back?" Dad said, "Fine, $3,000. Pay up." I stared at him, trying to decide if he was actually serious. "You stole my car, and now you're trying to sell it back to me?" Mom lifted her chin. "We took what we deserved. After everything we've done for you, you wouldn't be where you are without us." I let out a sharp laugh. "Everything you've done for me? You mean like taking my money, pawning my stuff, and now stealing my car?" "Yeah, thanks for that." Dad stepped forward, puffing up like he was about to intimidate me into backing down. "You think you're better than us? You think you can just walk away? Family doesn't turn its back on family." I pulled out my phone. "You're right. But family also doesn't steal from each other." I dialed 911. Dad's smirk faltered for the first time. "You wouldn't." I held the phone to my ear. "Watch me." Mom started shouting something, but I had already turned away, listening to the dispatcher's voice come through the line. Mason stood by the porch, shifting uncomfortably as our parents kept ranting. I could see the conflict in his face. He wasn't like them, and he knew it. "Ryan, don't do this," Mom pleaded. "You're overreacting. It's just a car." I scoffed. "That's funny, because when I was paying for everything, it wasn't just money. Now that I'm gone, suddenly you think you can take whatever you want." Dad took another step forward. "You need to learn respect." I shook my head. Respect is earned, not stolen. The flashing lights appeared down the street. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The second police car pulled up. Mom's entire demeanor changed. 1 minute she was standing tall, glaring at me like I was a problem, and the next she was putting on a whole performance, waterworks and all. "Officer, this is just a big misunderstanding," she wailed, throwing her hands up. "Ryan gave us the car. He's just upset, that's all." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just crossed my arms and waited. The cops stepped out, taking in the situation. One of them, a tall guy with a no-nonsense expression, turned to me. "You the owner of the vehicle?" I nodded. "Yep." He gestured to my dad, who was standing by the car, arms crossed, looking like he was daring him to do something. "And that's your father?" "Unfortunately." The cop barely held back an eye roll before turning to my mom. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing that your son transferred ownership of the vehicle to you?" Mom's lips pressed together so tight they almost disappeared. She glanced at Dad like he might magically pull paperwork out of his pocket. Then she looked down at the ground. She stammered. "Well, no, but—" "Then it's not your car," the cop said flatly. "And from what I understand, you use a spare key to take it without his permission. That's theft." Mom's face turned red. "We're his parents. He owes us." The officer didn't even blink. "That's not how the law works, ma'am." Dad scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You're really going to arrest a man for taking his own kid's car?" The cop glanced at his partner, then back at Dad. Yeah, we are. That was the moment it finally sank in for him. His face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little. Before he could finish, the second cop stepped forward and pulled out the cuffs. Sir, turn around. Hands behind your back. Mom lost it. She started crying, clutching her chest like someone had just told her the world was ending. You can't do this. He didn't mean it. He just made a mistake. But neither cop was interested in her theatrics. They clicked the cuffs onto Dad's wrists and started leading him toward the patrol car. He was still yelling, still calling me every name in the book, but it didn't matter. The second they closed the door, his voice was cut off. I exhaled, letting the weight of the moment settle in. Mom was still standing there, breathing heavily, eyes darting between me and the cops. You have to fix this, Ryan. We're your parents. I tilted my head. Where was all this family talk when you stole from me? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once in my life, she had nothing left to say. The officers weren't done yet. Ma'am, we have a few more questions for you, one of them said. Do you have any proof that your son willingly handed over this vehicle to you? Any texts, emails, written statements? Mom glanced at the house, as if searching for an answer somewhere in the peeling paint on the front door. It was verbal. We talked about it. The officer raised an eyebrow. So, no legal proof. She bit her lip, but didn't respond. Ma'am, are you aware that using a spare key to take a vehicle without consent falls under unauthorized use of a motor vehicle? That's a chargeable offense. Her face paled. You can't do this. I was just trying to help my family. The officer sighed, looking more annoyed than anything. Ma'am, do you have any idea how serious this is? You and your husband attempted to sell a vehicle that didn't belong to you. That's theft with intent to defraud. Her hands started shaking. You don't understand. We're struggling. We needed the money. So you stole from your own son? The words hit her like a slap. I watched as her face crumbled, as the weight of reality finally settled in. But it was too late. The second officer gestured toward the squad car. Ma'am, turn around. Her eyes widened. Wait, no. I didn't. Turn around. Tears started streaming down her face as she slowly turned, placing her hands behind her back. The cuffs clicked into place. And for the first time, I saw something I never thought I'd see. Regret. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. The neighbors were out now, standing on their porches, watching as both my parents were led to the police car. Some of them whispered. Others just stared. Mason was standing on the porch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. As they pushed Mom into the car, she finally looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, Ryan, don't let them do this. We're your family. I met her eyes and shook my head. Not anymore. And just like that, they were gone. It had been a few days since the arrest. Mason had called me multiple times, asking me not to press charges. He wasn't offending them. He was just exhausted, caught between being their son and knowing exactly what kind of people they were. In the end, I told the cops to let it go. They'd spent a night in jail, and that was enough. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted to move on. Big mistake. They didn't see it as mercy. They saw it as weakness. The message came late that night. A single text from Dad. You'll regret this, kid. I stared at the screen for a long time. No follow-up. No apology. Just a simple, empty threat. I wasn't scared. Just tired. I blocked his number, then did the same for Mom's. Then I turned to my girlfriend, who was sitting next to me on the couch, scrolling through apartments for rent. How do you feel about moving? She looked up, raising an eyebrow. Like to a new place? Or a new city? New city. Somewhere they can't find me. She blinked, then grinned. I'll grab my laptop. It took 2 weeks to pack up everything. We didn't have much, but we had enough to need a moving truck. Mason helped where he could, slipping me little bits of information about our parents. They think you're bluffing, he said. They're convinced you'll come back. I laughed. They're in for surprise. We found a quiet little town a few states over. Nothing fancy, but nice. A place where no one knew my name, where I wasn't Ryan, the guy who paid for everything. Just Ryan. At first. It was weird waking up and not worrying about what bill needed to be paid or what crisis I had to fix. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with some new demand, but it never did. Instead, I was waking up to fresh air, a quiet neighborhood, and the realization that my life finally belonged to me. I got a new job, but it didn't take long for me and my girlfriend to realize we didn't need it. Between her graphic design work and my freelance gigs, we were making more money than before. And the best part? No one was draining our bank accounts behind our backs. One afternoon, while unpacking, I found an old photo album buried in one of my boxes. Pictures of my childhood, vacations that felt like another lifetime. I flipped through them, wondering if I should keep them or just toss them in the trash. In the end, I packed them away in the attic. Not because I wanted them, but because I wanted to remind myself of where I came from and why I was never going back. One night, sitting on the porch of our new home, my girlfriend nudged me. "You regret it? Cutting them off." I thought about it for a second. Then I shook my head. Not even a little. Because for the first time in my life, I was free.